Welcome to the 43rd reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. The End of Love. I found myself as lonely as before because I wasn't free to go out with anybody else. I stayed home by myself unless I could talk Mum into going to the pictures with me. She agreed to it once in a while. We walked to the Regal cinema on Crouch Street, which we liked better than the Hippodrome, or occasionally to the Playhouse on St. John's Street, and watched a film of my choosing, since I paid for the tickets. There was a fourth cinema in Colchester called the Empire, commonly known as the Flea Pit, but because of the name, I never entered its doors. I always tried to pretend I wasn't with Mum, since it seemed second best to be at the pictures with her when I had a boyfriend. If the film had a romantic storyline, I was too embarrassed to discuss it with her. After a few such occasions, I decided to go on my own. I could get lost in the story and dream all the way home. Christmas came and went, not one moment of it included my boyfriend. I'd woken up on Christmas morning with a heaviness in my heart that stole the pleasure of my favourite holiday of the year. Much snow had fallen overnight, quite a rare occurrence for our part of England. Normally it sleeted, but a beautiful blanket of the white stuff covered everything, a perfect backdrop to the season. But I suffered torment, an intense longing to be near Patrick. After Christmas, I bought a Kodak Brownie Flash 2 box camera and delighted in taking black and white photos. Most of the photos were of Patrick, and he wasn't too fond of me, constantly snapping him in various poses. I asked one of his friends to take some photos of us together. If captured on film, our relationship would be cemented, have some validity to it. We looked so perfect together in the photos. I desperately dared to plan for our future. I took a photo of Mum sitting on the steps of our house. Like Patrick, she disliked having her photo taken, but gave in under my persistence. Afterwards, she said to me with a sigh, "So this is where I've ended up, sitting on these old worn-out steps. Poor Mum. I never wanted to end up like her." Patrick started pressuring me to go all the way, but I refused. Every time we found ourselves alone, he brought the subject up, as if to wear me down. In spring of 1959, he went on holiday with his parents. 2 weeks without him seemed an eternity to me, but he said it would soon pass and he'd send me a postcard. As soon as he left, loneliness settled on me, and I waited every day for the promised postcard to arrive. It was all I lived for. It came in the middle of the second week, with no endearing words on it, only an impersonal message saying he was having a nice time. The day I expected him home, I ran upstairs to the attic, pushed up the sash window, leaned on the windowsill, and waited for him to appear around the corner. Juliet, waiting for her Romeo. I imagined him seeing me up there, and in his delight, hurrying up the hill towards my house. I waited up there for hours, but he didn't come, nor the day after. On the third day after work, I went to his house. He showed no delight at seeing me and soon confessed to meeting a girl at the beach who had let him do anything he wanted, whatever that meant. And although he wasn't seeing her again, he didn't appear to care whether we stayed together or not. I should have packed him up like my factory friends suggested, but I was addicted to my creation. Our dates became less and less frequent, and sometimes he arranged to see me, but obviously never intended to. I'd waste an entire evening sitting at the front room window, waiting, and he wouldn't show. I never confronted him about his negligence, too desperate. After one of our rare dates, we stood in the front room of my house and he told me we were over. He didn't want to see me anymore. I stared at him in disbelief, burst into tears and reached out for him, but he wouldn't hold me. I begged him not to leave. He stood there, seemingly indifferent to the effects of the blow he'd delivered, much worse than any physical one I'd ever received. Still crying, I collapsed on a chair, bowed over, head in my hands. He stayed for a while before planting a little kiss on the back of my neck, a tender gesture showing he wasn't devoid of all feeling for me. And then he left. Darkness and despair wrapped itself around me. Mum showed concern that I refused to eat, but I wanted nothing to do with what I considered her feeble attempts to console me. What did she have to say that I could possibly want to hear? That it was not the end of the world, that I'd get over him, plenty more fish in the sea, that I'd find someone new and live happily ever after. It hadn't happened for her, and it wasn't likely to happen for me. I didn't believe it any more than I believed the stupid Cinderella story I had read as a child. There would be no fairy godmother, no beautiful gown, no fancy coach, no wonderful ball, no glass slipper left on the stair, and no handsome prince to pick it up and dance me into a happy life. Mum's real-life version was the reality. 1959 was considered by critics to be the year the music died because of all the lovesick teenager songs that pushed the more traditional tunes out of the charts. Not so. 1959 was the year I died. At least in the sense that living became so painful, dying was preferable. Never to wake up to another day of trying to breathe. My heart wasn't simply broken, but smashed into 1,000 pieces, and an aching agony in my chest existed as physical proof. In some weird way, it was a comfort that so many of the popular songs cried out the personal agonies of my soul, the search for love and once found lost. Dozens of songs eager to convince me that my condition was typical of the average teenager. Then, to cap it all off, there arrived the long-playing record of the bittersweet modern version of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Leonard Bernstein's stage musical, West Side Story. The tragedy completed, the entire music industry identified with my suffering, so I immersed myself in it, played the part. I'd recently bought a battery-driven record player since our house had still not been converted to the new AC current. Dad signed for me to buy it on hire purchase so I could buy the new vinyl records. On some Saturday mornings I went with David up the hill to Man's Music Shop on the High Street and listened to the latest records in the soundproof booths inside the shop. After I turned 16, Mum announced she'd been paying into an insurance for me for years and it had matured. Not a large amount of money, but she probably hoped I would use it for an educational purpose instead of a transistor radio. They were quite expensive at the time, having recently arrived in the shops. The small red leather-cased Perdio transistor I purchased, no bigger than a pocketbook, ran on batteries and had a carrying handle. It allowed me to listen to Radio Luxembourg under the bed covers at night. On that little transistor back in February, I learnt of the tragic death of Buddy Holly in a plane crash. His song, Raining in My Heart, released after his death, became my theme song. Music became an avenue in which to disappear for a while, away from the reality of my situation, but I still had to go to the factory each day, and that became more and more difficult. I lay in bed until the last possible minute and was quite often late, clocking in as a result. Shortly before the breakup with Patrick, I'd been moved downstairs to a different department, not because I was valuable to the management, but more because I wasn't. And as they couldn't sack me on account of my dad, they shipped me off to make somebody else's life miserable. My new job required me to stand up all day, and because I spent my dinner times not in the canteen, but trying to catch a glimpse of Patrick walking around the corner of my street, I soon became weak. To see him became my sustenance, but opting for what I pathetically mistook for love had its downside. One day I collapsed at my bench and somebody took me to the factory nurse. Deposited in her office, I cried until exhausted, relieved to let it all out to a total stranger. I hoped she might be able to help me make some sense of the loss, comfort me, give me some hope. I realized afterwards that she, and possibly everybody else at the factory, must have known, via my dad, that my boyfriend had dumped me. But instead of helping me, she gave me a funny look and said she knew my mother. They had worked together during the war at St. Mary's Hospital. My mother had been a nervous individual, scared of her own shadow, who hid under tables when thunderstorms came, let alone German bombs. She made her out to be an object of ridicule, and in my weakened frame of mind, I had no strength to defend her. Visions flooded my mind of all the stories Mum told me about the war years, the daring rides in the ambulance jeeps to pick up wounded soldiers, the drunk man she bravely pushed down the front steps so he wouldn't come and hurt her babies, the food she dared to steal from the hospital so her children wouldn't go hungry, plus all the things she'd done to fight for herself in her younger years. The woman she remembered couldn't possibly be my mother, I blurted out. Oh, yes, she was, the nurse cruelly insisted. It was her, all right, and there was nothing brave about her. What does that make me, then? A weak link in the chain? A product of bad stock, like a jittery horse at the cattle market Din said no one wants to buy? What does any of it have to do with my situation now? In a panic, I left as fast as I could and never wanted to return. I'd keep my feelings all to myself and not let anybody in. How many times had I heard myself say that? Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.